and say, I take refuge in the Buddha mind, the one bright source of all things. I take refuge in the Dharma, all teachings which point to liberation, all those teachings which we can practice and embody. I take refuge in the Sangha. The Sangha is the source of love, of kindness, of interaction, of relationship. So I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, three transcendental truths that are bigger than each of our individual selves. So I thought it would be appropriate this morning to talk a little bit about freedom. 4th of July weekend, those of you who were around in public events this weekend, we saw lots of liberation and freedom and signs and t-shirts of one sort or another. So I thought we could have a little discussion about that at different levels. Now, first off, from kind of an ordinary American, North American modern view, why aspire to freedom? Why be free? And it's a rhetorical question in this case. So usually, in my experience, freedom means, okay, I have the freedom to buy things. I can buy anything I want. And I can own anything I want. Don't take away my freedom to own something. I'm free to own and to buy things. I'm free to go places. And I'm free to choose. I want what I want when I want it. And these kinds of freedoms are nice. I mean, none of us object to being able to get what we want when we want it as best we can. None of us object to being able to choose to go places, to do things. But, and we tend to associate these kinds of freedoms with a amelioration of suffering, amelioration of discomfort, amelioration of dissatisfaction or dis-ease or disharmony, something. We feel like, okay, if I can buy something which I want, that sense of lack or need is ameliorated. Or if I can go where I want, I get restless, I don't like this particular place, I can go someplace else where I'll feel more at ease, more comfortable, etc. If this is all we understand about freedom, then we are living lives of quiet desperation, as Thoreau said. If that's all we understand about freedom, we are living lives of quiet desperation, kind of desperately, quietly hoping something, someplace, something, someone. I just get it. If I could just do it. If I can just, then I'll find ease of heart. And with that level of understanding, and that kind of sense of quiet desperation, I think that was Thoreau's term, we live in self-made prisons. We mistake routines for security. We mistake order for security. We mistake opinions for truth. We do mistake excitement for happiness. We mistake the roles that we're in for our identity. So I think that there's a bigger view that we can have of liberation, and especially given the community that we're talking about and what we're all doing here. So the Dalai Lama describes enlightenment. Now, in Buddhism, as you all know, there are the 4 noble observations. 4 things that everybody can observe. Sometimes they're called truths, but I think observation is a little more personal. Everybody has challenges. There's difficulties everywhere. And that is true whether we're young or old, or whether we're rich or we're poor. It's true whether it's a bright sunny day or not day, that there are difficulties of one sort or another. Sometimes great difficulties, sometimes not so great difficulties. The number one observation of Buddhism: people have difficulties, challenges, friction. The number 2 observation of Buddhism is the more that we are clinging and grasping and craving, the more that we are looking to grab something to fulfill our unhappiness, the more that we are clinging to something that's going to change and hoping it won't change, the more unhappy we are, the more problems we create. That we can create our own problems, we can create our own friction, our own dissatisfaction, our own discomfort. We can just watch that happen. We can watch people and ourselves do that. Second observation, sometimes it's translated as clinging, craving, sometimes desire, which is not a very good translation. The third is, it is possible to find liberation. The liberation is possible. That it is, we do not have to, the life of quiet desperation is not our, our fundamental truth. It's not a fundamental way of being. It is possible to find liberation. And so sometimes we call that liberation enlightenment. Kensho, awakening. Now, so the Dalai Lama describes the third noble observation of liberation is possible, liberation is our fundamental truth. He describes enlightenment as the awakening of the mind's true nature by purifying thoughts, removing obstructions, removing obscurations, and overcoming dissonant emotions. Okay, the awakening of the mind's true nature through purifying thought, removing obscuration, overcoming dissonant emotion. It's a state of irreversibility, achieved by cultivating wisdom and compassion. And he says it's like a process of someone planting soil for seeds. If you want sesame oil, you've got to prepare the soil, and you've got to plant the seed, and you've got to grow the crop, and you've got to harvest the crop, and you've got to process the crop, and then you end up eventually with oil. Now, and that's a wonderful definition, and there's all kinds of techniques and approaches that we can use to help purify thought, to remove obstructions or obscurations, or to remove those obstacles that we and other people have put in our path. And he says, overcoming dissonant emotion, but I think that we can harmonize dissonant emotion. We can see into dissonant emotion. We can become vibrantly alive without it also being a source of suffering. In Zen, the Zen Buddhist tradition, which is part of Buddhism, which is the Mahayana, part of the Mahayana sect of Buddhism, we say that it is the experience of the non-dual which is always present. And to see that with that experience we are inherently liberated. So the difference between the kind of the Tibetan Vajrayana approach at the level we're talking about with the Dalai Lama is that there is a path of practice, and if we continue practicing this path, we gradually, little by little, clarify the mind, open the heart, and encounter liberation. And the other path, the path of Zen, is directly seeing, directly experiencing the non-dual. I mean, there's nothing but the non-dual. If it's non-dual, it means there's no other. So directly recognizing that is, and then of course if you recognize that, you've got to also do all the hard work to overcome your karmic obstacles, your old habits of mind, your old patterns. So there's kind of the direct insight, and the direct insight, one of the analogies that's used is direct insight is you're in a dream, you're in a nightmare, and suddenly you wake up and you realize, oh, it was just a dream. And the other analogy that's used for the gradual path is that as you are walking through a soft rain, gradually, little by little, your clothing becomes saturated. And of course, you can't say one or the other of them is exactly true, but they're different sides, different dimensions of it. So when we talk about freedom and liberation in this tradition, we have to look at the levels of happiness, levels of satisfaction. So we're talking about freedom and liberation somehow are connected to happiness, satisfaction, meaning, and peace. So when we say that this is about this day, this weekend is about freedom, about liberation, from a bigger perspective, it's about how do we find happiness, satisfaction, meaning, and peace? What are the elements? Now, if we look at that, again, we can look at it in two ways. There is transient experience. One of my mottos I've had lately is excitement is not happiness. You know, the fact that you're on a roller coaster and you're tremendously excited does not mean that that translates into stable happiness and a way of relating to other people. The fact that you can go to an amusement park and get shot in the air, 50 feet and feel like you're going to die, and you feel totally alive for a second, does not translate into having good relationships with people. So the happiness that we talk about, the satisfaction, the liberation, the freedom that we tend to talk about in this tradition does not have the same kind of opposition, same kind of opposite. So if you get shot into the air, I've never done this, but I've seen it, watched it. You get shot into the air, however many feet they go, and you're just absolutely, completely, totally alert and terrified you're going to die, and then you come back down. The thrill, the excitement of that is very short-lived, and it is immediately contrasted with the dullness, the ordinariness of regular life. If we think thrilling is the way to live, we can't live that way all the time. There's signs as you go in toward Longview about college, and it says, "This is joy," and it's filled with all kinds of people who look like they're on a roller coaster, just excited and wild-eyed, and this is joy. This is not what we talk about with Dharma. In Dharma, we talk about a more stable, a deeper experience, one that it becomes the ground of being. It doesn't become a high and a low, it becomes a ground of being, a ground of satisfaction, a ground where there is meaning and ease. And that comes from releasing false beliefs, releasing old stuck ideas of separation, from othering, from releasing mental bondage. So in this model, the spiritual model of freedom, says the signs of freedom are the four immeasurables, the four divine abidings, the four Brahma-viharas, which is loving kindness, sympathetic joy, compassion, and equanimity. That the embodiment of those four qualities, loving kindness, sympathetic joy, compassion, and equanimity, is, in a way, the heart is at ease. The heart is connected. The heart has meaning. The heart is not collapsed in upon itself. And those are the signs of liberation. One model. And because if we see that clearly and we actually touch the non-dual, that is, things aren't two, that everything I see is part of me. It's a whole other talk. But the non-dual, so if we have a glimpse of the non-dual, when I improve, the world improves. When the world improves, I improve. When I'm at peace, the world I see is more at peace. When the world I see is more at peace, I'm more at peace. When I am full of loving kindness, satisfaction, appreciation, then I also see and recognize those things in the world. And so when I need to be, my life needs good caretaking, then the life of the world needs good caretaking. And so the kind of satisfaction we talk about in this tradition is one where we feel our dukkha, our challenges are mitigated, ameliorated, and so are those in the world that we live in. Here are a few quotes. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Marcus Aurelius, about the 1st century AD, CE. True freedom is always spiritual. It has something to do with your innermost being, which cannot be chained, handcuffed, or put into a jail. Rajneesh. The only real prison is fear. And the only real freedom is freedom from fear. Aung San Suu Kyi. If you know the truth will set you free. Jesus Christ. The beginning of freedom is the realization that you are not the thinker. Something we emphasize around here all the time. You can have thoughts without a thinker. Eckhart Tolle. And just as the great oceans have but one taste, the taste of salt, so too there is one taste fundamental to all the true teachings of the way, and this is the taste of freedom, of liberation. Shakyamuni Buddha. So, our aspiration is in a way the same as everybody else's aspiration in this country in this particular date. Freedom, liberation, celebrating freedom, celebrating liberation. And it does not negate other kinds of celebration. It does not negate more superficial ways of looking at that, but it includes them and more, and more, and more. And we know that liberation is not just, oh yes, I'm now liberated, but it is a practice. It is a dedication. You know, there's all these T-shirts that say, freedom is not free, or, you know, you've got to bear arms for liberation, or, you know, rifles make you happy. I forget what they are. But in this case, it does take practice. It is not free. It does take direct investigation. It does take inquiry. It does take looking into the nature of mind. And that's why we come together with a particular container that can help us to do that. It does take dedication. It does take that we have to have an aspiration, and we have to have confidence that, oh yes, it's possible. I mean, the Buddha clearly says, liberation is possible, and all the great sages, and all the great traditions say liberation is possible. But until we actually have faith and direct experience that yes, liberation is possible for me, liberation is possible in my life, in my world, then it's hard to get the traction. And I think that sometimes, for some people, it's really a calling. We have a calling for freedom. We have a calling for liberation. We realize that we are stuck in some way, and there's a calling in there, and that calling becomes manifested as how we live our life. Some more quotes. For to be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. Nelson Mandela. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Martin Luther King. The secret of happiness is freedom. The secret of freedom is courage. Carrie Jones. Change is not peaceful. Do not expect peace here. But faith, courage, and determination. You must win your freedom. the great jihad of Islam is to win one's freedom within one's heart. The struggle is not out there making everybody else try to do what we think they should do, but the struggle is trying to look into our old habits of mind, the old fixed ways that have run our life so long. And it's not easy. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. Give up all desire for enjoyment in earth or heaven. Think of nothing but spiritual freedom. Swami Vivekananda. Now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. Corinthians. The most important kind of freedom to be is to be what you really are. The most important kind of freedom is to be what you really are. Jim Morrison, the drum of the Jim Morrison. Doors, yes. Doors, I forgot. Always interesting where things come from. So why, we also have to have this question of, okay, so we got this suffering piece, we got this liberation piece, but is that the only reason? I mean, is that maybe it is. The total reason for practicing is, I just don't want the friction of my life. I think there are other ways that we can also see ourselves as being investigating this. There are three basic approaches that fuel the investigation, that fuel the spiritual path. One, of course, is suffering. We see suffering and we say, I don't want to feel suffering, I want to become free of suffering, and so we start in the spiritual path. Sometimes people have some direct experience, they have an epiphany, they're in the mountains, they have a near-death experience, they have some experience that opens something for them, and they say, oh, I can see that, I now need to practice and walk in that way. And third is we see exemplars, or we read about exemplars. We read about or encounter people that the Buddha, there's his experience, is he encountered a sannyasa, he encountered somebody who was a spiritual practitioner who had renounced the world, and it influenced, touched him so deeply that he began to say, oh, this is possible for me too. So, why practice liberation? I mean, first off, one thing is, if we're looking at this world with all of its challenges, vicissitudes, all of its idiosyncrasies and paradoxes and incomprehensible things that happen, we begin to see it's a shifting morass, a shifting matrix, a shifting maze. And we begin to think, oh, what is beyond the shifting maze? Is that all there is? Is there just the shifting maze? Maybe beyond the illusion, the confusion, that every time we have a different view of things, it looks different. Maybe there's something more constant. And so we want to see beyond the illusion. Maybe we have had a taste that freedom and liberation is our true nature. There's a koan story about Inyadata, who was taking something like ayahuasca or psilocybin, and had an experience of couldn't find her head. Started looking around and said, I can't see my head, I can't see my head. And started looking, where's my head, where's my head? Or we've done Douglas Harding's investigation, having no head. And she was looking, who am I? Who am I? I can't see my head. I actually can't see my eyes. I don't know that I'm there. And so he was kind of frantically searching around. She came to a friend and said, I can't see my head. I don't know who I am. They whapped him on the head. Oh, right there. Right there, right here is right where we are. Right here is where our original nature is. Right here is what's alive. And, coming back to the suffering thing, that we have the option of not suffering. So why not learn how to pick that option? So, perhaps the last one, why get on the spiritual path? Why not? Why not? So, my suggestion is that this is a time to celebrate freedom. This is a time to discover freedom. This is a time to practice freedom. And the practicing freedom involves the four immeasurables: loving kindness, sympathetic joy, compassion, equanimity. And so to practice those freedoms in our daily life, with the people that we meet, with our own heart, is the best way, the most profound way to touch our inherent liberation and to be a benefit to everybody around us. Everybody around you is much happier if you're practicing loving kindness, sympathetic joy, equanimity, and compassion than if you're carrying guns. So, let's all do it. Comments, objections, insights, random bits of advice? Floor is open. Okay, Pat's raising her hand. Why don't you give it to Pat? Pat? You weren't raising your hand? So I'm just asking, is this true? Is this your experience? Am I just sort of a lot of hot air? Do you have anybody can attest or detest anything I just said?
Well, I do 100% agree that the practice of the four Brahma Viharas is important. Like, yes, there would be openings, but then it's about continuous practice every single moment. And in my practice, I've had glimpses of that, and the way to actually make it bigger, make it larger, is to actually do it. No hesitation, no fear. It's okay, just here. And just the continuous opening of the heart. And life is so much brighter and bigger, and it's gonna be okay. And I also learned that practicing these four Brahma Viharas, you allow things to change. There's no fixation, there's no fixed self, because there is a bigger perspective, and being able to watch that and actually find that out for myself is something I'm truly grateful for. And then it just fuels my curiosity more and more, and there's just no other way to live. And yes, the original nature, I guess. But even the original nature takes practice, maybe for even 1,000 years.
Thank you. Ian?
I have an image of the spiritual longing, which is a salmon swimming upstream, which is to say, often it feels like the process of moving towards that, towards liberation, feels like I'm pushing against everything in the universe, craving and fear and all that stuff, and also there's a unrelenting calling to keep doing it. And so I have the image, usually when I become conscious of that, it's the image of a salmon swimming upstream in the sense that they're going in the complete opposite direction of everything, and they also couldn't not do it. Like, it's just, they have to. And that So that's been useful for me when I feel like, what, this seems impossible. And also I was like, well, what else are you going to do? Just like
Nice.
you said.
Thank you, well expressed. In Asia, there's lots of pictures of carp doing that, going against the stream. Because the habits of the world are so strong. And they'll happily carry us downstream. Is Megan?
I am reminded right now of Byron Katie, and it's something that's coming up in my practice a lot, which is there's like a moment, a wave, a belief of seeing liberation as so far away and freedom as so far, and I am so far, and I am just in a mound of craving and confusion. And then for that itself to be a moment of questioning the belief, because it creates such a, it's a visual, I perceive it in so many ways that the path is long and I'm so far away. And then like starting to actually see like, what is that belief made of right now? And that is like a moment of freedom to actually see what that's made out of. Even saying it right now is like bringing relief. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. One of the things that impressed me about Byron Katie, we were at a 10-day training with her, did a few of those, and she was, this group of people, 350, 400 people, basically just essentially off the streets. She was talking about no self and liberation and freedom, just total confidence, total at ease, and everybody can do this, of course. So that really struck me as, now that took confidence on her part to be able to say to all those people with great confidence. Who else?
Hi, it's my first time today doing
great.
any Zen meditation, but I said a prayer before I came that I could be open to what was supposed to be shown to me, and as soon as you started talking, I just sat and smiled because I have had moments of that freedom and liberation, and just coming from a place of only love, and it just is, for me, a great reminder that the only power I have is my choice each day, and I've chose a lot to be in suffering, that's comfortable, and making it that simple about right this moment and not trying to, control and navigate what's going to happen. Just allowing myself today is pretty, I just feel really light and free. So thank you.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for stepping forward and speaking. We only have this moment. It's the only time we can experience anything. And so if you're not suffering right this moment, then there's no suffering. Suffering is all in the future. It might be when I might have to experience what I don't want. We can learn to just not have our mind go there. Okay, Ruth?
Is resistance necessary for our evolution?
Well, you're talking. What do you think?
Well, I know that it was misery that brought me here. And so I'd say yes.
So everything has a place. Because it exists. Everything has a place. The world is one whole big blue and white shining sphere, and in that big blue and white shining sphere, everything has a place. Volcanoes have a place, earthquakes have a place, and craziness has a place, and flamingos have a place, and thoughts of guns have a place. Everything has a place. So I guess we have to say resistance too has a place. And when we encounter something difficult, we can either use it in a way that brings us to a larger, more inclusive state of mind, a mind that is more, or we can use it as a way of shrinking and becoming more afraid. So everything has a place. And as you all know, I've said this over and over again, if we truly appreciate and have loving kindness for who you are right now, for this life that you have right now, if you really say, this life is a miracle, this life with its ups and its downs, with its depressions, with its difficulties, with its challenges, if I really appreciate this life, then I have to appreciate every single thing that led up to it. Because without every single failure, every single resistance, every single, miserable thing and wonderful thing that happened in my life, it would not be here. So when we truly appreciate the way things are right now, we suddenly can truly appreciate the life that we have had. And it transforms our life from being a life of darkness to being a life of learning, a life of evolution, a life of inclusive expansion.
So we should be grateful for resistance.
I think gratitude is a good place to be.
Thank you.
We have to do a little bit more or else lunch won't be ready. So we're compelled to sit here and talk for a moment more. Who would like to help us in that endeavor? Mira?
I have a question also, and it comes from more of the level of freedom we were talking about earlier of, to be able to do this thing or go that place or buy that thing or whatever. And in that realm, there's often conflicts between like individual freedoms and societal benefit. My choice about whether or not I get my child vaccinated might have impacts on the other children in his class or whatever. And I'm wondering if there's any, I guess I want to believe that there's no conflict in the spiritual realm of freedom, that if I'm completely free being my full embodied whole self, that it's only going to be beneficial but I'm to others. But I'm curious if you've encountered any pitfalls around that, the personal spiritual freedom versus the well-being of the whole.
Wonderful question. Let me first hear what Pastor Mira has to say. She's a religious professional, so I may as well hear what she has to say.
I mean, my first inclination is no, that true freedom would be being accepting of what is happening in the moment, which includes the other people around me and their well-being. I guess I have a fear sometimes that if I fully let go into that space of freedom, that I might lose sight of some of the things that I feel like I need to be keeping track of in order to be responsible to other people in the world.
Thank you. Anybody else help answer that question? Talking about individual responsibility, individual freedom versus public health versus the whole. Anybody who hasn't spoken yet? Lori, absolutely talk to Lori. And I apologize, the person to your left, I don't know your name. Yeah. Rachel. Okay, thank you, Rachel. I know most of these other people, but
discernment. I think that's the adjective or the way of being, is to, when we do follow the path the spiritual path and embrace that freedom to be ourselves. I think that if we are mindful, we can have that discernment, like when we take our precepts, we talk about, giving and taking life are up to us, right? So it's not really a black and white thing. So I think that if you are in a really good spiritual place, you will have that ability to think beyond your own freedom towards the others. And, of course, we're going to make mistakes, and then that's where that compassion for ourselves and others comes in. So, like, if the other person isn't doing what is good for the whole, we have compassion for that individual just as we would have compassion for ourselves. But if we're ultimately doing the right thing, we're going to make better choices on a more regular basis. That's what I think.
You want to talk anything about the Laurie method for doing that?
I do not, but I did want you to expound just a hair on, you mentioned that kind of the two different paths, the path of the two different Buddhist paths, like our path of like investigating the mind, and then the other path of just kind of following the path. So anyway, if you could just kind of clarify those two differences. Thank you.
Sure. First off, there is a line that Laurie mentioned, killing and giving life are up to us. And that doesn't mean I have to decide, am I going to shoot Anshin or not? That's not what that's about. It's about, do I see things as alive and vibrant, or do I see them as dead? So we can see this floor is alive and vibrant. It's pulsing with light and with reflection. We know that it's moving. It's got a life to it. Or do I see it as a dead, inanimate object? That's more what that killing and giving life is about. So most people aren't confused by that, but sometimes that gets a little confusing. So on the path of maturity, of human development, as you all know, there are growth spurts. We watch Hart running around in here, and those of you who've been around for a year have seen him go from a little lump to a powerhouse. And there are growth spurts. And those growth spurts can seem to happen very suddenly, that suddenly we are much older than we thought we were. Or suddenly we've grown in some way and that can happen very quickly. But the slow path is that in order to integrate that growth, in order to curate that growth, in order to cultivate that growth, it takes time. So there is no shortcut to spiritual maturity. A 20-year-old can have deep, profound insight into the nature of things, but they don't have 60 years of cultivation. So we've got to look at both sides. On one hand, the earlier in our life we can have clear, direct insight into the non-dual, the better. On the other hand, if we think that's particularly sets us apart and makes us special in some way, we've got 50 more years to learn that's not true. On the other hand, if we have 50 years, 60 years of maturity, and we really have grown into be a healthy human being, we can then have insight into the inclusive nature of mind. And that relieves a lot of suffering. But there's no shortcut to spiritual maturity. So both are important.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Last comment? Chosen?
My first comment is that if you ask people if they have questions, and then when they say their question, you ask them to answer the question, you will get fewer and fewer questions.
How true, how true.
The second comment is related to what Mira was talking about people feeling they should have the personal liberty to choose not to vaccinate their children or themselves. Having grown up in an era where polio was real and was crippling people for life if they survived, and when we every month in the ICU we had a baby die of H. flu meningitis until the immunization came along and was required, and then we didn't see it ever again. So, I know the miracle of vaccinations. But the one that's always intrigued me is for German measles, not the regular measles. But German measles is not a severe illness for children. But if pregnant women get German measles, it will cause deformity in their fetus. And so you will have a child who's born who's deformed and crippled. So it was a decision that people accepted. I will get a German measles vaccine, not to benefit me, but to benefit an unknown child yet to be born. And I think, to me, that was the epitome of compassion and long view and wisdom. And it's kind of sad that we're losing that vision, that ability.
Thank you. So I think just to conclude with that, if we are only practicing for ourselves, great. Good for everyone. But if we are also practicing to be a benefit to other people, then the world changes. Our community changes, our family changes. So the more inclusive our view, and the more dedicated we are to the foundation of the heart, the better our life becomes, and the better those around us lives become. Thank you all.